So apparently torrents have fallen off.
In 2006, 70% of all internet traffic was torrenting,
2000.
the primary way
70%? That's a lot.
for people to pirate songs, movies, and video games. Yet today, it's barely a percentage of the internet. How did torrenting become so popular, and how did it die out?
I think that you also got to keep in mind that like he's measuring this by percentages, and there's more people on the internet in general, and so, you know, that's going to affect it. But we look at the rest of it.
In the late 90s, internet traffic was booming, as was internet speeds.
Yeah.
Most users had left dial-up internet for broadband, moving from 50 kilobits per second to over 1 megabit per second, or...
It was crazy. Dude, I remember my dad, he got, I think it was called like Earthlink or something, and it was like websites would just pop. Boop, there it is. Boop, there it is. There it is. I remember like, it's like I was driving a car at 200 miles an hour.
20 times the speed. This leap forward opened a world of possibilities. It no longer took minutes to load an image or download a song, but seconds. Traffic was booming.
Yeah, like my friend, like he would download music, like whenever we had dial-up, he would download it whenever he would, like in the morning before we went to school, and then we'd come back home from school, and we'd like watch Dragon Ball Z. It was like Frieza Saga at that time, and then we'd listen to the music. Like I'm talking like 98, 99, somewhere around there.
There was a problem. People wanted to download songs and movies, but couldn't. There was no Netflix or Disney Plus, and iTunes was barely getting off the ground. These services allow us to access music, movies, games, and everything else super easily and legally. But back then, before the spread of centralized servers and systems, the internet was more like the Wild West. Companies didn't know how to service or monetize it. So out of this void came peer-to-peer. Imagine you and thousands of others wanted to listen to a new song online, but there was no easy way to do it. There was no website you could go to and just stream from. Instead, someone had to rip it from a CD and decide to use a peer-to-peer platform.
When you connect, you're downloading music from another Napster user's machine. And
it's Kazaa. We used Kazaa. That was, Napster never used Napster, but it was Kazaa for us.
The programs, the music never
Kazaa into LimeWire.
Here, the user would seed the file for others on a platform like Napster. They aren't uploading the file. Instead, they're allowing you to download the song directly from their computer. Then, with the file on your computer, you could seed it for others. The more seeders, the easier it was to download. Peer-to-peer made it easy for pirated songs and movies to spread like wildfire. Platforms like Napster, LimeWire, and BitTorrent began appearing, and soon they all had millions of users. The internet in the 2000s was a different place. It seemed like everyone was pirating. All of this was obviously illegal, and it was a bit annoying to do, with all kinds of viruses hiding in the seed files. But I
gotta tell you guys that if you were one of these fucking idiots that was downloading shit that had viruses in it, I'm sorry, but downwiththesickness.exe is not from fucking Disturbed. Stop it. Like, bringmethelife.exe does the opposite for your computer. Holy fuck.
Didn't stop people. It was easy enough for it to catch on.
It was so bad.
Industries like film and music had never seen such widespread copyright infringement. And it was only getting worse. Torrenting had taken off. Its size was unbelievable. By 2006, 70% of the internet was peer-to-peer file sharing.
That's nuts.
People no longer needed to buy CDs for songs. They could torrent them and then export them to an MP3 player. Easy for users, but it was costing copyright holders everything. The Motion Picture Association of America lost over $2.3 billion in potential revenue thanks to internet piracy.
I think this is always a misattribution. Because, like, there's a lot of albums that I had and I downloaded that I would have never paid for. There's some of them that I would have paid for, though. Like, you know, for sure in some cases, but not all cases. And it's impossible to really know what the ratio is.
Of which came from peer-to-peer. Artists saw their new songs and albums leaked and downloaded. And it wasn't just artists who did. The global entertainment industry as a whole had been changed forever, and copyright holders needed to take action.
The baddest is, yeah,
first
bro,
instinct
this is
of media
bad.
companies was to chase down the platform owners. These were the big peer-to-peer platforms.
I remember the Pirate Bay, like them trying to find these guys. This was so entertaining to watch.
If they were shut down,
so good.
users wouldn't be able to pirate files. At least, that's what they thought.
Yeah.
One of the first peer-to-peer platforms was Napster, and it naturally became one of their first targets.
Legal troubles over copyright infringement aren't slowing down Napster.
What a surprise.
The song-swapping company is now in the top 50 list of most visited sites on the web, according to Media Metrics.
But Napster made one fatal mistake. While the company did not host any songs themselves, they used a centralized server to organize these pirated files. And unfortunately for them, this gave law enforcement an easy target. Napster was sued for tens of millions by copyright holders, including A&M Records and even Metallica.
I remember,
Yet,
people
during
were
the
mad at
lawsuits,
Metallica because of
something
this.
unexpected happened.
Yeah.
These lawsuits had given Napster a lot of publicity. Even more people began signing up, rising to a peak of
And also, like, so socially, I mean, I was a kid then, right? So, like, I don't remember it very well. But what I remember is that the majority of people were on the side of the torrenters, because it wasn't just Napster that was getting sued. It was like random moms that their kid downloaded a song and then like she's being sued for like, you know, $250,000. And like those stories were like really popular on like the news media back then. And it actually turned a lot of people against the record labels and against the artists that were trying to push the copyright stuff.
80 million users. Not only that, existing users began downloading as much as they could before the platform disappeared.
Exactly.
After countless lawsuits and payouts, Napster filed for bankruptcy in September of 2002. And soon, other cases began to spring up, the most notable of which was the Recording Industry Association of America, or the RIAA, suing LimeWire on behalf of record labels. They alleged that LimeWire had cost the music industry a ridiculous $75 trillion.
$75 trillion. Uh-huh. Okay.
For context, the GDP of the entire
Sure.
planet at the time was 59 trillion.
That's about to say,
Naturally, the court labeled this as absurd. RIAA then pushed for $50 billion in damages, and eventually a final settlement of $105 million was reached. But this was just the beginning. Copyright owners soon realized how difficult the battle against piracy was.
If they think Napster's bad, I can tell you there's a lot worse coming. You know, there's software that's you know, that is untraceable just around the corner.
Whenever authorities closed down one platform,
he was right.
3 more appeared. Users simply migrated to the new platforms and continued their illegal downloads elsewhere. Not only that, future platforms became decentralized.
Well, it's also that people realized that the way that people got sued was that they got sued for seeding and not for downloading. Because the way that, like, so for example, like the copyright infringement, a lot of the people that got lawsuits against them were the ones that were distributing the files and not the ones that were downloading it. Because it was easier to like paint a larger picture of like a bigger number that you're losing money for, because it could be like, oh, you seeded it to this person who then seeded it to everybody else, right? So like the projection was a lot larger. And so that's really another big difference of what happened. Not seeding is an asshole move. Sure. And like, you remember like, so, and they still have these, but do you remember like the old like websites that were invite only? I was like part of like one or two of them, and the websites that you had that were invite only, like What CD and stuff like that, right? And I think there's a few other ones too, and those you had to seed, and if you didn't, you got kicked off the website.
And harder to track down, and the lawsuits were getting longer and longer. While it took Napster a couple of years to be shut down, torrent platforms like LimeWire
That was
were
the big
active
one. That was
for
the
10.
huge one.
Similarly, it took authorities a decade to finally arrest the last Pirate Bay founder, and even when they did, the website continued to exist. Some copyright holders and artists tried a more devious, malicious tactic. If they couldn't shut down torrenting legally, they would kill it from the inside. In 2003, Madonna intentionally leaked her latest album, American Life, onto file-sharing platforms. Except, it wasn't really her music. To a user browsing and torrenting, the songs might seem up to par, but the tracks contained no music, just Madonna saying, "What the F do you think you're doing?" This was called torrent poisoning. It would make the data less reliable, and it would give some users a good scare. Perhaps enough to stop them from torrenting further. And it wasn't just artists who did it either. HAL Laboratory intentionally leaked their latest video game, Earthbound, to a user who downloaded it.
The true five-head move was made by From Software by naming the horse in Elden Ring Torrent. Fucking brilliant.
Everything seemed normal at first, but as the game went on, the difficulty grew rampantly, far more than normal. Not only that, near the end of the game, the copy would freeze, and when the player rebooted, they would see all of their progress had been deleted.
That's
but
funny.
Even with all the lawsuits and the torrent poisoning, things weren't working. Torrenting was still only growing. So organizations like RIAA tried a
because the problem is like, so that stuff didn't really work because what would end up happening is that like the most popular ones that were the most seeded and the most downloaded would be the ones that were the best files. And like, I don't know about you guys, but like back in the day, like I was always kind of like apprehensive to download files that had less than like 100 seeders or less than like 100 downloads. I'm like, yeah, I don't know really if this one's good or not, right? And so I would just wait for the higher one to come out and then just use that. Absolutely, exactly.
Tactic next. While going after the platform owners, they also began to sue the users.
It's crazy. I haven't even thought about this in
Tens of
like
users
15
received
years.
lawsuits for illegally downloading music. College students found themselves charged with absurd charges. Jamie Thomas, a single mother of two, was found liable for $222,000 in damages for sharing.
And this was like 20 years ago too. And this right here is the reason why. Like, I think that a lot of the public kind of turned against the recording, the recording like groups. It's because like it's very, very clear that this is a total distortion of punishment, right?
24 songs on Kazaa. This did scare off a lot of users, but created even more problems. RIAA had been forcing internet service providers to hand over user data on a technicality, Digital Millennium Copyright Act. If they suspected someone of copyright infringement, an ISP had to hand over this data without the approval of a judge. With that came an abuse of power. RIAA began sending thousands of lawsuits to users even vaguely connected to the platforms. For example, Sarah Ward, a grandmother, was sued for using the Windows-only Kazaa software to download hardcore rap music. Except she only owned a Macintosh computer. Eventually, all of that did change. In 2003, a judge ruled that the Digital Millennium Copyright Act gave RIAA no right to request user data from ISPs.
It got nerfed.
RIAA was unlawfully casting wide nets to catch users. Moving forward, RIAA would need to conduct its efforts under the supervision of a judge. This brought their crusade against users to a halt. So copyright holders tried yet
and again, like there's a lot of pretense that, I mean, I don't know, this guy seems like he's probably a bit younger than me, but like a lot of us that are like, you know, mid-30s, like we remember this, right? About how like publicly there was like a huge push for this to go away. Yeah. Huge push for this to go away.
Tactic. Authorities instead decided to follow the money. Chasing every platform wasn't working. Instead, they wanted to prevent any more from appearing by starving them. Torrent platforms made money through displaying advertising. authorities could stop their revenue, they would stop the incentive behind the websites.
Right.
They created a infringing website list and began pressuring search engines like Google to block customers from accessing these platforms. Partly, this was to decrease traffic, but more importantly, to decrease ad revenue. Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, AOL, and many other companies all promised to help reduce the flow of ad revenue to piracy sites. This certainly hurt torrenting and moved it away from the mainstream. But
Yeah, this happened a lot. It's like you weren't able to search for Pirate Bay on Google.
wasn't enough to kill it. There were still millions of people torrenting files and finding a way to keep piracy platforms popular. Ironically, the solution was something completely unintentional, one that no one initially saw coming. In the early 2000s, e-commerce was still in its infancy. iTunes launched in 2001, sometime after the launch of platforms like Napster, and it took some time before it saw mainstream adoption. There weren't a lot of legal and affordable alternatives to piracy. Companies were still figuring out how to distribute online, so torrenting was just the easiest way for many to consume media. But that all changed. In 2007,
and also like it was really expensive. Like having to spend money in order to download music, or sorry, to buy an album was like a lot. Like I remember we bought like, you know, if I think of like how much money did I spend on like an album from like Coheed and Cambria or like AFI or Foo Fighters or like Tool, it was like what, like $12 to $18 somewhere around there, right? That's a lot. That was a lot of money back then.
The battle between pirates and law enforcement came the real killer, Netflix. You could suddenly watch anything you wanted for just $9 per month. And that's
Isn't it crazy how Gavin was right? Because you can clearly see what the difference here is, right?
Netflix would explode in popularity. In 2 short years, they had surpassed 11 million subscribers, which doubled 2 years after that. This is what really killed torrenting, convenience. The logic is simple. If the legal method is easier and reasonably priced, almost everyone will use the legal service. A small percentage will continue.
That's exactly what I think happened. Like, how many of you guys are dudes that used to use LimeWire, but now you use Spotify? I can't be the only one, right? Yeah. Yeah. It's just a better service. Not me, I pirate still? Sure, there's some people that still do. But for me, I feel like the service is so good. And also, like, almost all the music that I want is on LimeWire. Because there were a lot of problems that, like, pirating had. Like, for example, you would download music and it wouldn't be mixed properly. Sometimes you would get a different file type than what you wanted. The names of the songs wouldn't be done properly, so you had to, like, redo it and, like, go into, like, the file and, like, rename everything. I'm not even talking about Trojan horses, right? I'm not talking about any viruses or anything like that. I'm just saying about, like, sometimes they're, like, they're in a music file type that you didn't want to see. There were just like other problems, like movies were recorded from like a movie theater, so the quality was really bad. Like quality being bad was a huge one, right?
Need to pirate content to have it for free. But
so,
convenience is what drives not just most of our purchases, but our entire behavior.
And I think also another component for this is that as more casual internet users entered the market, casual internet users, it's like, have you ever had somebody, like, for those of y'all that played WoW, have you ever had somebody that didn't want to download add-ons because it was like a third-party website and, like, they didn't want to download stuff onto their computer? You had somebody, right? And so, like, imagine how, and like, that's how people felt about torrenting. That's how they felt about pirating. And how many of you were the person or knew the person who was the person that got all of the new movies and stuff like that from a torrent website? Like, there was, like, that guy. Like, just tell you, it wasn't me, actually. For movies, it was Zach's dad. And he knew somebody that would, like, bro, a movie would come out, and it was like, you know, I'm trying to think, like, Children of Men. And, like, 2 days after it comes out in movie theaters, like, we're watching it over at Zach's grandma's house, and, like, the quality is impeccable. He was like, bro, like he knew the guy. Bro, 3 hours top. Yeah, it was nuts.
Definitely easier to watch shows and movies legally through Netflix than to torrent. Not only that, with the release of more subscription platforms like Spotify, users had little reason to use piracy. Thus began the sharp decline of torrenting.
Yeah, the music quality was very uncertain.
Torrenting gradually fell out of favor. By 2011, peer-to-peer had fallen to under 19% of internet traffic in North America. By 2013, that traffic was down
and
to
also some people were afraid of getting in trouble too. Like it absolutely was a component that people were afraid of getting in trouble.
7.39%. It was on a gradual decline, and with it came the rise of web traffic. In 2015, all of peer-to-peer was estimated to be just 3% of internet traffic. For a comparison, that was about the size of Hulu, which wasn't even the biggest streaming site. This created a snowball effect. There were less people on these platforms, so less people to see files. Not only was there less traffic, but it was getting harder and harder to torrent altogether. With less
and also, like, it becomes harder, like, with games now, because games are always online, and they have different types of, like, authentication. So it's harder now to download a game than it was. Like, it was much easier to download. Like, I remember I used to burn copies and sell them of, old Command and Conquer games. I do this in middle school. And nowadays, it's not that easy. Yeah, it's not that easy, man. Well, it's easy. Well, it's not.
Came less impact too. In 2017, pirates threatened to release Orange is the New Black on BitTorrent before it was officially released. But despite leaking the show, there was almost zero impact on the official performance. By this point, the users who torrented the show probably weren't going to subscribe to Netflix either way.
That's also another big component, is like, this is a problem, is that I think that people consumed a lot more entertainment and they consumed a lot more types of music when they could torrent, because there was no, like, you go to the store, you go to Walmart, right? You go to Best Buy, you're buying a CD. Okay, well, this is like $15. But like, if you can just download it for free, if it's bad, it doesn't matter. You just stop listening to it, right?
Today, torrenting has almost disappeared. It still exists, but is a tiny part on the fringe of the internet. Torrenting is simply too inconvenient for most people. Piracy does still exist today, but it's not peer-to-peer. It's
well, here's the other issue too, right? Is that, so before, this is the, let me go ahead and just kind of show you. So I'm just going to make this pretty easy, right? And then so, yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and do this. And so, like, basically, the outer circle here, the green, is like average internet users that are not savvy with the internet. And then if you look at the middle circle here, the middle circle is going to be those are the people that are savvy with the internet and they know what they're doing. So I think this number has like really not gotten that much bigger than it was, probably a bit more, but not a whole lot. But comparatively, we are a smaller percentage because so many new people are using the internet. And like, by the way, this is not really accurate. This isn't like a, one-to-one reproduction, right? I think it's even bigger difference than this. A big thing is I couldn't find the genre of music I liked back then. Yeah, and that's also another big problem, is that it was, again, a service issue. Like, for me, I really, really, really love electronic music. Like, I was listening to, like, I remember Elements of Life from Tiesto came out, and I listened to it in middle school, and I was like, this is the greatest music I've ever heard, right? I love techno. I love that stuff, and I was like, growing up, I was like, oh, yeah, I want to go to raves when I get older and, like, do all this stuff. And so I was really, really into this. And then, like, I started listening to, like, Armin van Buuren's State of Trance, and, like, I got really into, like, the whole scene for it, right? Especially, like, the, like, mid-2000s, like, electronic music. And you guys know that, like, trance and, like, really, like, they changed the name, right? It's basically EDM now. And like that didn't really get popular in the US until like I'd say 2007 to 2009. And like then you saw like a lot of European artists like Tiesto, Calvin Harris, David Guetta, and like these are people that were known in the scene, but they weren't like, Americanized. Then they got really, really big. Right? But before then, there was like no place that you could really buy that shit. Yeah, like that was it. Like you'd have to download it. Infected Mushroom? Yeah, they were really old, like absolutely. I was never really a big fan of them, but like I respect it, right? Sure. And Martin Garrix? I feel like isn't Martin Garrix now? Isn't he like 25? So like he was a really young guy, I'm pretty sure, whenever he first started. So like, yeah, he's got to be recent because he's a really young guy. And so, yeah, I'm thinking of like, let me think of a few of them. Yeah. Oh, fuck. Avicii. Avicii was around back then. Not a whole lot. Scooter, Bonobo. Yeah, exactly. That's a big one. Bass Hunter, 100%. And so like a lot of these artists, that Swedish House Mafia, well, they were still popular in the US, to be fair. Benny Benassi. Yeah. And like, well, Benny Benassi had a few songs. Like Satisfaction was pretty popular here too, to be fair. But like, yeah, a lot more of the Paul Oakenfold. Yep, definitely. Stevie Aoki. He was kind of, I think Stevie Aoki was a bit later, right? But like, just in general, either way, I could talk about this a lot. The point is that you're absolutely right that like the options for music in the US were way more narrow, and that made more people go and use torrents as well. It was like a whole different component to it.
Legal streaming, where users can watch content without downloading anything, albeit while getting bombarded with advertisements and viruses.
Yeah.
With dozens of streaming services out and prices constantly being hiked, illegal streaming is catching steam.
Yeah.
By 2016, illegal streaming claimed 73% of internet piracy, but the same cannot be said about torrenting. Times have changed. Those who grew up around BitTorrent and Napster are much older.
It's because people are reluctant to have things downloaded onto their PC. Straight up. They just don't want to go on a website that they have to put something on their PC because people are more technologically conscious and they're afraid of it. Straight up. It's scary now? Yeah, exactly. Like, I wouldn't do it. I'll tell you that. I definitely wouldn't do it.
And less likely to pirate. In the meantime, younger generations grew up in a totally different world with Netflix, Spotify, and all kinds of convenient and legal methods.
Like, I'll give you an example for me recently. So I wanted to watch Serial Experiments Lane, right? I heard this was really good, and I remember thinking, like, this came out about the same time as Metal Gear Solid, and like, I was like, I wonder, like the chances that Kojima watched Serial Experiments Lane and watched Escape from New York and then thought, this is a really good idea, let's put these two together and made Metal Gear Solid. I feel like the chances of that happening are about 150%, okay? So I wanted to watch the show, but I couldn't find it on Netflix or on Crunchyroll at the time. So I ended up watching it on YouTube, right? Like, so yeah, I had to watch it on YouTube. And like, again, service issue. I would have paid for it, but it just wasn't available.
No desire or need to use torrenting, or rather, without knowing it even existed in the first place. If you're interested in deeper dives, interviews with insiders, and exclusive tech analysis, you can sign up to our free weekly newsletter. Link is below. But until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.
Yeah, I pretty much agree. Like, I feel like as a guy that was like, I was always really like on the edge of this kind of stuff, so I have like a lot to say about this, a lot to add about this. Because I saw, like, at the very beginning, I knew other people that were doing the movie stuff, etc. And, like, this to me is, like, a pretty popular topic, pretty interesting topic. I do think that a lot of the reasons why it's kind of like Death of a Thousand Cuts, where, like, you have less people that are, it's harder, like, the internet is more centralized, it's less of the Wild West, it's harder to regulate, and then the ways that you do regulate it and the ways that our people are able to get around the regulations are harder to do, and they require a higher degree of competency, right? Like being able to Google Pirate Bay and then, Pirate Bay Kanye West and immediately go download, 808s and Heartbreak easy, 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 right? Super fucking easy. But now, because you can't do that, totally different situation, right? And so like now there's more hoops to jump through. And it's really simple, right? It's like if you have people running a race, if you put one hurdle in the race, you're going to have less people complete the race. Now put 30 hurdles in it. There's going to be somebody who gets over all 30 hurdles and they finish the race. But there's less of them than if you didn't have any hurdles. And that's what they did. And also, I think it is a service issue. I genuinely believe that Spotify is an incredible product. I think Spotify should sponsor me because of how much I think it's a good service. Like, it's great. And 950 songs, is it 950 right now? I don't know. How many do I have on my playlist? No, 1,400. So yeah, I've had so many of these. Hashtag ad. I think it's great. Maybe you might not like it. If you don't think Spotify's good, totally up to you. But I think that it's great, and my experience on the website has been really good. And with the program has been really good. And so, yeah. Not good enough? Yeah, sure, right? But like Tidal, I see a Tidal, like, I don't really see like, that was like the Jay-Z Kanye platform. I didn't really use that a whole lot. But I feel like what is going to happen, though, is that, again, if you look back at the, Gavin quote that is true, is that piracy being a service issue and not a money issue. I think that also when you make service so inconvenient, like streaming services have made now, like right now, like if you want to watch all of the new shows, you have to be shelling out like $100 a month, basically, unless you're just like shifting from one to the other, which they don't want you to do because that's why they try to get you to pay in like blocks of like 3, 6, and 1 year months, right? Or, 3 or 6 months or like 1 year. And so that happens a lot. And so now you're seeing so many of these different streaming services come out and they're all trying to take a bite and take a piece of your pie. Now you're seeing people move back to pirating. And I think that this is going to happen more, but it's not going to be like it was back in 2006. It's just going to be more often than it is like right today. Like I think in 2 or 3 years, pirating is going to be worse than it is now. Yeah, Starbucks, watch movies for the win. Yeah, maybe, right? I mean, there's a lot of these websites, etc. So yeah. They should do collabs to services for cheaper price. I think, that's a good idea. So maybe what they should do is they should get like different combinations of channels, like, have like Netflix streaming service, Hulu, and like maybe, I don't know, Spotify, and then, maybe have like Disney Plus, and then you can just like pay for all of these in like a block, right? I mean, has anybody done that? Sounds like a really good idea. Sounds like a great idea, guys. What the hell? Why hasn't somebody done this? Yeah, that's nuts. Disney's doing it already? Oh, I bet they are. 100% I bet they are. How is it that we've somehow gone back to the reason why we pirate shit in the first place? The lack of choices in payment? The reason why is because everything is prone to excess and everything is prone to radicalization in one way or another. Like, exceeding causes excess. It's the same as like, it's like velocity, right? Like physics, right? If you're dropping something, it will continue to go faster until there's like a certain point, right? And so what happens is that once something starts making money, then it tries to make more and more and more money, right? And so you have that velocity and that force multiplier happen, and then eventually that comes in contact with the user experience, and then the user experience decreases, then it repeats itself, right? It's like a wheel, right? It's always turning. So it's like the user experience is really bad. Okay, then you go to piracy. The user experience is improved. Piracy decreases. And then as the profits increase and the expectation of profits increase, then piracy increases, and it's just a cycle, right? And I don't know really, I personally think that this is unavoidable. I know that a lot of people talk about this and they have like kind of like the contemporary like a quarterly earnings, business report, stockholder, fiduciary responsibility, inevitability, like this is bad capitalism take on it. But I actually don't think that's true. I think that human greed, this is simply a manifestation of human greed. And human greed has no limits, it has no language, and it has no economic structure. I think you can have human greed in communism, capitalism, socialism, totalitarianism, anything like that. So I don't think that there's going to be any one system or any one way to stop this from happening long term. I think the best thing to do is to make sure that people have the tools to hold themselves accountable and to hold the companies accountable so improvements and things like this can be made and that wheel can keep turning. It's like you can't expect the wheel to never move anymore, but you can expect the wheel to continue to turn. Does that make sense? I randomly thought of this metaphor. Maybe it's not a good idea, but like that's the way I see it. Schrodinger's greed. Well, I'm just saying that like a lot of people that attribute negative things to capitalism would see the same problems in socialism as well. It would just be different people, and like the rules of the game would be slightly altered, but ultimately it would be the same, outcome of behavior. And I think that's really what the difference is. Greed drives innovation to some extent. Greed, and that's the thing, right? Is that greed does have some benefits to it. And if you oversimplify things, of course, some things don't make sense and are bad. But in a general sense, I think that is true. Absolutely.